All right, let's get right into it. Today we're breaking down the dramatic end to a manhunt that went on for nearly 5 full months. We're going to cover the capture of escaped inmate Derrick Groves, from his initial jailbreak all the way to that final tense standoff. And the headline news is this: the search is over. The last of 10 fugitives from a major New Orleans jailbreak is finally, officially, back in custody. So, you have to ask, right? How did a 5-month manhunt for a convicted murderer end up in a tense standoff hundreds of miles from where it all started? Well, that is the exact question we're digging into today. Derrick Groves was the final fugitive they were looking for from that May 16th Orleans Parish jailbreak. For the city of New Orleans, and especially for the victims of his crimes, his capture is a moment of long-awaited resolution. And what an ordeal it has been. Groves managed to stay off the grid, evading law enforcement for nearly 5 months, from May 16th all the way to his capture on October 8th. This finally brought an end to what was a huge and resource-intensive search. So, to really understand the significance of this capture, we first need to get a handle on who law enforcement was even looking for. Who exactly is Derrick Groves? To get why this manhunt was so urgent, you have to understand the context. Groves wasn't just some inmate awaiting trial. Nope. He's a 31-year-old convicted murderer who was already serving a life sentence. As you can imagine, law enforcement sources saw him as an extreme flight risk because, in their words, he had nothing to lose. This timeline really lays it all out, doesn't it? After his conviction in 2024, he escapes in May of 2025. And he wasn't alone. 9 other inmates got out with him. But here's the thing: while the others were all recaptured pretty quickly, Groves just vanished, sparking a multi-state search that finally came to a head in Atlanta. This quote from the Orleans DA really captures the concern everyone was feeling. The fact that the escape was so easy and the manhunt went on for so long, well, he called it a serious breach of public safety and a historic failure of custodial security. So yeah, his capture brought a huge sense of calm back to the community. So how did it all come to an end? Well, after months of dead ends and false leads, the manhunt finally zeroed in on one city: Atlanta, Georgia. No, the effort to find Groves was not a small local affair. It was a massive, coordinated operation. We're talking federal, state, and local law enforcement from both Louisiana and Georgia. All these agencies were working hand in hand, sharing information and chasing down every single tip. And then they got the breakthrough. It came from a tip. Acting on information that Groves might be inside a specific house in southwest Atlanta, a high-level task force of heavily armed officers swarmed the location and set up a perimeter. The final act was about to begin. So how did this standoff actually wrap up? It wasn't with a dramatic shootout, but with a really meticulous and patient search that went on for hours. The process was very methodical. First, they surrounded the house. Then, authorities started a painstaking, hours-long search. They eventually found Groves hiding in a crawl space. And according to the U.S. Marshals, he was taken into custody without any further incident, ending the whole thing peacefully. You can really get a sense of the immense relief from this quote by U.S. Marshal Brian Fair. After all those months of chasing leads that went absolutely nowhere, getting the call that he was finally, definitively in custody, well, that had to be a moment of major excitement and success for all the agencies involved. So, with Groves captured, the focus now shifts. What's the legal path forward to make sure he not only serves his sentence, but also faces consequences for the escape? The key legal process here is something called extradition. Because he was captured in Georgia, you can't just drive him back to Louisiana. There's a formal procedure that has to be followed to transfer him from one state's legal system to another. So the legal road ahead has a few steps. First, he's booked in Georgia and will have an extradition hearing. Now, whether he agrees to go or tries to fight it, he will ultimately be transported back to Louisiana. And once he's there, he's not just going back to serve his life sentence. He will also be facing brand new charges for the escape itself. This whole thing brings us to a final thought. The capture of Derrick Groves required this immense coordination, a relentless investigation, and in the end, one critical tip. It really makes you ask the question: in an age of interconnected law enforcement and public vigilance, what are the true limits of trying to disappear?